Okay, we are answering your questions, and if you didn't ask the question, someone else did. So thus we are answering questions. Question: Brown versus Board of Education happened in 1954. Why did it take so long to have public schools to allow kids of all color? Okay, so Brown versus Board of Education was a Supreme Court decision that made segregated public schools illegal, and the rules of the Supreme Court, one of its main jobs is to determine whether a law fits the Constitution of the United States. So, if a law does not fit the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the country, and if any other law doesn't fit the Constitution, then it is deemed unconstitutional and cannot be a law. So that's one of the Supreme Court's chief and primary jobs, is to determine if lower laws fit the Constitution. And the question was brought forth: do segregated, separate, and equal public schools for children fit the Constitution? And the Supreme Court decided no. And so thus segregation was deemed illegal in 1954. That's a little simplified, but that's how the main gist of it. So I guess what the question is asking: why did it take so long to have public schools to allow? So okay, well, once 1954 segregation was deemed illegal, it did take 1 or 2 years for many public schools to integrate. Okay, whether that's a long time, I don't know if that's what the questioner is asking. So like we have, for your further research, the Little Rock 9 was in 1957. That's when in Little Rock, Arkansas, one of the public schools was integrated in 1957. So it did take like 3 years. Well, is that what you mean by taking 3 years to get integrated? Well, you got to finish out the school year in 1954, and then you got to start a new school year, and then you got to make plans for integration. It's so within 3 years. I don't know if that's a long time, but you got to think that these schools had to have 1 or 2 years to plan integration. It's a big change in certain schools. I don't think that so. Further research: Little Rock 9, 1957. I don't think that's what the questioner meant. Did the questioner mean why are some schools seemingly very disproportionate based on color nowadays? I don't think the questioner meant that, but I will answer that. Today, schools are based upon where you live, your school districts. And if people of different colors live in different areas, then a school will be predominantly of one group or the other. That wouldn't be considered illegal because it's not official segregation. But today we do have, and people are commenting on this, and it's a mode of comment right now, is many schools are what they call de facto. And the word de facto means it's not under law, but it's happening. So it's not illegal, but it's happening. Many schools do see different groups over or underrepresented, whether it's certain religions over underrepresented, certain nationalities overrepresented, or not nationalities, I should say, historical nationalities over and underrepresented. And that's just because where people are living. So I don't think the questioner meant why are schools separated in some areas today. I think the question was, why did it take until 1954 for kids of all nationalities and colors to be allowed to go to school together? And that's a good question. And the simple answer is prejudice. Prejudice and racism. Okay? The timeline goes from the start of America, 1776-ish, until the mid-1800s. America had slavery, predominantly in the South, although there was slaves in the North and out in the West, but predominantly in the South. And that's up until the mid-1800s, the Civil War. And then from the end of the Civil War, mid-1800s, till the 1960s, they call it the Jim Crow laws, which were legal discrimination. And that includes separate and equal, different water fountains, different entrances, different segregated schools for people based on race. And that was until the 1960s. So I guess, it is not hyperbole to say that America was segregated until, I guess you could call 1960s and 1954 very recently. And I think that's what the questioner is asking. Why did it take so long to address discrimination? And the simple answer is racism. Certain states and certain areas did not want integration of colors or of nationalities, and they made racist laws. And this was not every state, okay? So when you look at Brown v. Board of Education, 1954, I want you to remember there were plenty of high schools, and just schools, K through 12, that were integrated around the country. It was only if states and local areas made laws against it. And that was predominantly, we can check this, and the data was in the South, but I know for a fact that Astoria, New York, 1951 was an integrated district. So it wasn't everywhere in America, but it was in places. And yes, I agree, it did take so long because racism and prejudice is something that humans have been dealing with since the beginning of civilization. And removing racism and prejudice is one of those new type of ideas as humanity, you could say, moves forward into a world of anti-racism, anti-prejudice, and inclusion, of looking at people as humans and not segregating or discriminating. So I think that's what the questioner wanted. Why did it take so long? Because it has been a long, long, long human journey to get rid of racism and prejudice. And if you think it took a long time for the United States to be integrated, look in the other question and answers. South Africa, the country of South Africa, was segregated up until the 1990. Further research. Look into the Little Rock Nine, one of the most famous examples of school integration with pictures, and the national federal government had to get involved in even though there was a Supreme Court case. Look into that. Everyone should know that. Something that many people do not know, many, if we're looking into prejudice and discrimination, there was a race riot in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I won't go too much into it because I'll let you do further research. But it was a riot in a city that left buildings and buildings and buildings burnt and people dead, and totally destroyed a whole neighborhood based on discrimination and prejudice. Very few Americans know about the Tulsa race riots of 1921. So look into that if you want to know things very, very few Americans know about. Okay. Why do people of color and people who are part of the LGBTQIA+ community still get told they can't do things when they have fought for rights and to be treated the same? Okay, so we make the distinction of fighting for rights and getting rights protected under law. Okay, so we're also going to make a distinction of people of color and LGBTQIA+ community, because there's federal law and state law. In federal law, and this is like 95% of all situations everywhere, 95%. There's special circumstances and it's very legal, very technical. But for people of color, 95% of the time, in all circumstances, by federal law, getting told you can't do something based on your color is illegal. There are the anti-discrimination laws say in employment and education and in housing and in business, you can't be told you can't do something, or you can't be denied service based on your protected class. And those protected classes are color, race, nationality, religion, physical, mental disability. So the federal government has set up federally protected classes where if you are told you can't do things in almost all places in public life, it's illegal. And then states can add on this and make it even more illegal. So if you know someone who's being told they can't do something because of their religion, their sex, their disability, their color, their national origin, chances are it is illegal, and the people or the business telling them they can't do it is breaking federal and state law. Now, of course, there are very specific cases. Age is included in that. age over 40. Okay, so you always have to look and see if it's one of the special cases, but in general, most of the time, you as a citizen have a right not to be told that you can't do something. Okay, and that starts in the Civil Rights Act, Title IX, sex discrimination in school, the part of the government, the federal government, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission investigates cases of discrimination. It all goes under, and the New York State has an anti-discrimination department where if there's problems of discrimination in housing and business. Okay, so that's the first part. Now, if someone is still being told they can't do something, why? That's prejudice. That's most likely illegal prejudice and illegal discrimination. Now we get to your second part of the question. Why is this with the LGBTQIA+ community? And the answer is that the community, the LGBTQ community, is still in the process of getting federally protected rights. So the federal protections of rights is based on sex, which has been expanded to male, female, and sexual preference, gay marriage. Those are all Supreme Court cases, okay? And so if you are being told, if someone is being told they can't do something because of sex or sexual attraction or marriage, that is illegal. But other LGBTQ rights are not federally protected, and so some states protect those rights and some don't. For example, New York State has almost full LGBTQ protection under the law. So if in New York State you're being told you can't do something, you can't apply to a school, you can't get a job, okay, if you can't do something in the public sphere because of LGBTQ status, chances are it's illegal in New York State. Now go to another state and those rights are not protected. So we make a differentiation, okay, of some protected classes who have already not only fought for rights, but then also got those rights enshrined in law at the federal government and the state governments. And then we see that the LGBTQ community is in the process of fighting for rights with the federal government and states. And now if someone has legal rights and they are still denied or discriminated against, the question of why, that's illegal prejudice. So is there protection by law? Is there prejudice? Is there fight for rights? Who is fighting for rights? And all of those parts of those questions need to be looked into in the overall of history, because it's not just one time. It wasn't just in 1960 when equal rights were fought for. Well, older people didn't get rights for multiple years after that, okay? So we see rights are fought for and gained over a course of time and over a course of from the federal government and from state governments. So here's an update on the rights of LGBTQ. So as we were literally making this video, the Supreme Court released their decision, and so the Supreme Court in the United States has decided that working rights for transgender and gay is covered under existing civil rights law from the 1960s. And so thus, without having read into it, the decision itself, on its face, it looks like discriminating based upon transgender or gay would be illegal in violating the Civil Rights Act. So, like I said, I haven't read the decision in depth or the full decision. That could be a very good decision to read. I find that reading Supreme Court cases, when the when the justices write their decisions, it's actually very accessible language. It's not like too much lawyerese or really high PhD level words. And so there's a good chance that maybe average citizens can read through some of these decisions. So I would recommend going through and finding and reading through some of the Supreme Court decisions on some of the cases that you're very interested in. So as we spoke, the update is it could very well be that transgender and gay is now a protected class federally, which would mean that states couldn't discriminate and businesses couldn't discriminate based on that class. Like I said, I have not read the decision, but that's what the headlines are. but you never just read the headlines. Always read the article, and sometimes don't even read the article. Well, read the article, but then go to the actual court case to make sure that the media is interpreting it correctly. So, vocabulary transgender, and further research, you can Google Supreme Court transgender case, and that will bring you up to the recent decision. Okay, how does trade influence the world today? Well, technically, trade influences the world today similar to how it did throughout history, and also a little more uniquely today. So, first off, long-distance trade today is the same as long-distance trade in history because you can get things that you normally couldn't get in your location. You can get things that you want. So you can improve your life, if that's what you call improving your life, by getting things that you don't have. A very simple thing is you can literally get bananas in New York State. You would never be able to have a banana if you didn't have long-distance trade, okay? And let's just go back to the universal example going back thousands of years. There are, let's just say, Indian spices. You would not be able to have your Indian spices just like people 1,000, 2,000 years ago couldn't have their Indian spices if there wasn't world trade. So many times people really, really like trade because it offers them luxury items and stuff they'd love to have that they never would have before. And that's still true today. You could look in the ideas of resources also. I mean, sometimes it's life and death. If you don't have a salt trade, and everywhere there is no salt, there is a salt trade. Otherwise, there are not humans, okay? Because humans cannot survive without salt. So if there's a place without a supply of salt, no humans are going to live there unless there's a salt trade, okay? In New York State, there's actually a town called Salt Point. Well, guess what? It was the place of the United States that got salt and traded it to other states that didn't have salt. There you go. So this goes with metals and iron. And so sometimes places just need long-distance trade to get the very fundamentals of creating a civilization in life. So how is trade today different? Well, today, movement of goods and services and people is so cheaper that countries can specialize. And so trade today reduces the cost of every good produced, okay? Like, because different countries have different wages and have different specialties and different raw materials, and different standards of living and different currencies, some countries can produce things so much more, how do we say, efficiently and cheaply. So, for example, we're really examining today, you should really do further research, because China is one of the biggest traders in the world, the Chinese supply chains. What does China make and what does China export? Because China can produce a lot of goods cheaper than if they were produced in the United States. So, and this happens with a lot with small electronics. This happens a lot with lots of plastic stuff and the assembly of your high-end electronic phones. Some parts are made all over the world, but the assembly in Apple happens in China. And this would happen with other countries with clothes and sewing of clothes. Okay, so it becomes cheaper to manufacture the goods in a different country. And so the end result is cheaper goods. Of course, this brings a very, very further research and also vocabulary, the idea of free trade between countries versus, let's say, protectionism, having all the jobs in your country. Because guess what? There's really not jobs in the United States for assembling air conditioners or for sewing clothes or for putting together phones. We don't have those jobs because other countries can do it cheaper. And if you were to do it in the United States, protectionism, to have everything USA made, the prices would go up. So how does trade influence the world? Because each country is able to specialize in what they do the best and be more efficient, it drives down prices. More goods, cheaper goods, which means everybody gets to own more quote-unquote things. That's the main benefit of world trade. Now, the opposite of benefits, the costs of world trade. Well, countries are dependent on other countries, okay? And so all of a sudden, if the supply chains break down, we cannot just manufacture protective antivirus masks. They come from other countries. So you see recently the United States had to switch immediately, almost on government order. The government could have ordered this. I can't remember if they did or not. Companies in the US to produce masks and ventilators, and they were more expensive because it had to be produced in the United States. But for that small amount of time, there was a shortage of all these goods because the supply chain to China was interrupted. So you may be relying on other countries for things that you think are very, very important. That's a cost of world trade. Also, you get into some ideas that some of these countries around the world are creating cheaper goods because their workers aren't up to the standard of living of more developed economies. So one of the reasons it's cheaper is because workers are treated or don't have the luxuries or the rights of, let's say, workers in the United States. Other times, so that's something to worry about. And some of the costs are, with all these sectors removed, like there are humans in the United States that would absolutely thrive and be amazing at a job of assembling stuff, like assembling air conditioners or literally sewing clothes. These are good quality jobs that the US used to have. Well, now there's less. So the choice of jobs is limited. There's still jobs. I mean, we used to have full employment at the United States before the pandemic. But the choice of what to do as a job is limited, with whole versions, whole sectors of the economy, like assembly, just gone. And you can't choose to do that. Even though you might really, really, really be good at it or really want to do it, those jobs aren't there because they're in other countries. So that's a cost of world trade also. And this is a vocabulary. Supply chains, interdependence. All our countries are dependent. So if there's a problem with China and an economic crash, our economy is going down a little bit too. If the US economy goes down, world economy is going down. That happened in the Great Depression. Okay, it seems that history is speeding up. Is this having to do with a more complete recording of information, or are events actually speeding up due to population, technology, or some unknown factor? I'm going to go with your... Okay, so we don't know it. Milestones in history and knowledge is speeding up, okay? The amount that we know, the percentage of people able to do things, for example, the percentage of people able to read went from small percentages to amazingly high, and that went within the last 600 years. The ability to produce energy went from a really low kilojoules per hour to an astronomical. The ability to cause destruction with one single piece of technology went from, you see what I'm saying, like a boulder to a cannonball to a nuclear bomb. And that all of these technologies happened in the last 200 years. Population, when you look at a population graph, it looks like, when we look at a knowledge graph, it looks like, when we look, ability to go to space is this, and then boom, all right? Amount of words printed, this, boom, trade, that. So we do see exponential growth within the last couple hundred years. You're not making that up. So I say it is, I'm just guessing here, but I'm saying it is due to population. It's due to the population. It's due to the fact that technological advances grow on each other. New types of energy, the steam engine, as opposed to using animals, to be able to use machines to make energy, totally revolutionizes how much work humans can do. And I'm using that in the physics term of, force times time. Our capabilities are growing and growing and growing, and the amount we know is growing and growing, and our interconnectedness of the world is growing, and the population is growing. So think, everything just gets more, and when you have more, it can go faster. Think about it. This is my example. In 1914, right at the start of World War I, There's farmers in Ireland plowing the field the exact same way they did in China 2000 BC. The exact same way. You know, people are transporting themselves in a horse and a carriage in 1900. Okay? And then in 100 years, 1900 through 2020s, look at what's going on. Look at the pace of what's going on. Moon landings, computers, no electricity in 1700. People had light and heat the same way from 10,000 BC to the cities of 5,000 BC up until 1800. They lit the world the same way. Then electricity happens. Okay? Things are speeding up. And really, what a time to be alive in the last 200 years. Like, you can go back, and if you were born anytime, you know, before the last 200 years, there was a really good chance you would just go through your whole life and literally everything would be the same, and you never got to see unbelievable. I mean, you'd see cultural shifts and things. There'd be rulers, maybe 1, 2, 3 different rulers come and go. There'd be some wars you'd live through some wars, and so you'd see things change, but you wouldn't have these unbelievable technological shifts and stuff. In just my own life, I went from growing up with not one computer to having the first home computers ever created in the United States, to waiting 2 days for an email to be sent, to dial-up modems, to instantaneous interwebs where we are right now, to no video games, to Pong, to Pac-Man, to World of Warcraft. I mean, just the amount of change. And my parents went from no moon landing to moon landing. And I mean, think, a couple hundred years ago, they went from letters to telegraphs to telephones. But all of this is within the last couple hundred years. It's literally amazing. Now, does that mean the pace of life has gone forward? Well, yeah, we know so much more now as people. So the things in our brains are so much more. The amount of information, what we know, just on average, the amount of stimulus and news and interconnectedness that we are existing in is more than ever. But are we busier? Not necessarily. I mean, if you were to go back, let's say before electricity and all of that, let's go to Napoleon. Let's go to Napoleon, before Napoleon, Louis the 16th, Louis the 14th. I guarantee they woke up and they were busy ruling their country until the end of that day. I mean, they were 100% busy. If you were a farmer in history, most of the time you were working. If you were in the city through most of history, you were working, you were hustling, okay? You know, if you were a hunter and gatherer, you had a lot of free time. But if you were ever plugged into a city, or if your farm was around a city, you were working. Life was busy. And it was complex, but it's not the same as nowadays. Yes, I think history is speeding up, and I think our advancements are speeding up, and I think it's exactly what you had said, population, technology. Or if you watch the other question and answers, our aliens that have us in the zoo have gotten bored after 10,000 years of cities, and they want to spice it up. So they're making things, this is zoo theory, so they're making things a lot more exciting for us in the last couple hundred years. So that could be your unknown factor right there. The alien curators who keep us in this zoo. They just want to spice some things up. All right. Thanks for watching.